Hello there, I'm Presley, and today I will be going over the events and giving my overall thoughts on episode 20 of the Bleach 1000-Year Blood War. Now, this episode covers chapters 571 to 579, where it covers about half of 579. So overall, this is about 8.5 chapters covered in this episode. The episode starts off where we left off last episode, and we see Isane concerned for Yachiru when she notices that her nose is bleeding. Of course, Yachiru attempts to hit him again, he disappears. She instead now has a large gash on her shoulder from where she has been struck. We get this character explaining what his ability is. His name is Gwenly. And we have him briefly going over how his ability works. In version 1, he can make his form disappear. In version 2, he can make his existence disappear. And in version 3, he can just outright make his existence disappear from someone's mind. Of course, his Schrift is the vanishing point. Then, of course, the opening theme plays. Of course, after erasing his existence from their minds, he starts to reintroduce himself. To which Yachiru immediately walks up and attempts to hit him. Of course, Yachiru explains that the reason why she immediately tried to hit him was, just on instinct because she got a hair-raising feeling from this guy. Of course, we have Yachiru explaining a bit more about this to Isane. We see Gwenly attempt to attack Yachiru, only for her to then slash his face with her Zanpakuto. And of course, Yachiru starts explaining how her Zanpakuto works, stating that her sword strikes you whether you dodge it or not. That her sword is a copycat sword, and there are 2 copycats on the front and back of her sword. So basically, the more you gauge your timing, the more your timing gets thrown off, and the more likely you'll get hit. Then of course you see these 2 creatures appear behind her, and this is her Shikai. And she slashes the guy right down the middle. Of course, that one guy still is not dead. He walks back in through the doorway. However, then we see part of his body cut away. And someone is talking to him, and we see sitting on the edge of the bed behind the barrier is Gremmy, a member of the Sternritters. Of course, Gwenly, he lunges at Gremmy. Gremmy just causes this guy to explode. Because, this guy is just a product of his imagination. This is someone that he created. Of course, Isane yells at Gremmy to get away from Kensei and Rose, who are behind the barrier with Gremmy. However, as Gremmy is walking through the barrier, he states that, it doesn't really matter that, he's already killed them. Of course, Yachiru uses his Zanpakuto to slash at Gremmy, but, he ducks out of the way. He's able to stop her hand, with only his hand, and then we see her arm twist. And, we hear this horrible cracking sound. And of course, Yachiru kind of wonders, what happened to her arm. And Gremmy explains that, what if your arm was made of a cookie? Then you'd think, reasonably, it would break. So that's what's become reality. Of course, we see some more of Yachiru's bones break as a result of this. Of course, then we see someone burst through the wall. It is Kenpachi. And now I'm just going to go ahead and explain what Gremmy's Schrift is and how it functions and works. Gremmy's Schrift is the visionary, and anything he can imagine becomes reality. However, his Schrift does also work on him. So basically, it's not like he's immune to his Schrift. Of course, Gremmy starts raising the ground beneath them, raising it higher and higher until it's kind of like a giant square as, their main battlefield. Of course, we do see Rose and Kensei fall out of there on their beds, to which Isane obviously jumps down after them. We have a bit of talking between Kenpachi and Gremmy for a bit. Kenpachi brings up his sword and swings it down onto Gremmy right on his shoulder. It stops there. To which Gremmy states that, he was able to stop this blade by simply imagining that his body is harder than steel. To which the blade then does cut through his shoulder. And Kenpachi states, well, you could have just told me you were as hard as steel, and then I could have tried to cut through you as though I was cutting through steel. And of course, he states that Gremmy's imagination will not be able to create anything that he cannot cut through. Of course, we then cut over to where we can see several unnamed Soul Reapers, looking up at this gigantic square. And after a bit, they state that they can sense Kenpachi's spiritual pressure. And we cut back over to Gremmy and Kenpachi. Of course, we can see where Gremmy's wounds have healed, because he imagined that his wounds were healed. And we see him send a bunch of magma flying towards Kenpachi. Of course, he's able to cut through it. Of course, Kenpachi notices that Yachiru is still there, and he tells her to leave. Of course, Gremmy states that it's not really like she can, without potentially shattering her bones, because he's made her bones as frail and brittle as a cookie would be. Of course, Kenpachi jumps up in the air, ready to bring his sword down again on Gremmy. Then suddenly he is encased in a giant square of water. Of course, then the water falls into a giant crack in the ground that has just appeared. The giant crack in the ground closes. Of course, Kenpachi immediately breaks through it, obviously. Of course, we can see him slash through a giant piece of steel that Gremmy's thrown out in front of him. Kenpachi states that, if Yachiru's being held by him, then clearly her bones are back to normal. We briefly cut over to Askin Naklava, where we see him watching the fight through, a pair of binoculars. We cut back over to the fight. Kenpachi tells Yachiru to go meet up with Isane, and that's what Yachiru does. Of course, we have a bit of back and forth talking between Kenpachi and Gremmy. Of course, Gremmy sends giant chunks of the ground flying towards Kenpachi, attempting to encase him in them. However, he easily breaks through them. Of course, Gremmy is clearly having an excellent time during this fight. He has started to really enjoy this. Of course, then there are suddenly just a bunch of firearms surrounding Gremmy, firing at Kenpachi. Then, of course, he sends a bunch of missiles at Kenpachi, which Kenpachi easily cuts in half. Of course, this giant dome is created around Gremmy, which Kenpachi easily slashes through. And, he cuts in the Gremmy's shoulder. Of course, Kenpachi's not able to pull his sword out, and Gremmy brings down a giant hand in an attempt to crush Kenpachi. Of course, he easily breaks through that, and he slashes Gremmy again, and then we can hear Gremmy in his head start to spiral a bit, where we see Gremmy realize that he was too late to move, and he starts spiraling from there, going into the I'll be too late to heal, I won't be able to move it away for his next move, I won't be able to counter it, clearly setting himself up for disaster. We see him get struck by Kenpachi's blade again after he's already thought that he is going to be struck by Kenpachi's next strike. Now, of course, Kenpachi then brings up to him, did he imagine himself losing? And of course, this is enough to snap Gremmy out of it and realize, oh yeah, I almost did cause my own death, using my own ability. How foolish that would have been. We then see him create a double of himself. Because, this guy can just outright create life with his imagination. So, this just fully is a one-for-one copy of himself. It can use his ability even, it's crazy. And, then of course, he creates a giant meteor in the sky. Because, things have to keep escalating at this point. Of course, we briefly see some of the unnamed Soul Reapers freaking out about this meteor, like anyone would. Of course, Kenpachi jumps up into the air, and we can hear him utter the phrase, "Drink no Jirashi." We briefly cut over to Yachiru watching all this, and, we get a bit of that flashback, with Kenpachi finding her as a baby. Of course, we then see Kenpachi cut through the meteor, and we get this cool visual in the anime, which I do really like as an addition, where as he's getting closer and he's, swinging his blade down, it briefly changes back into Kid Zaraki. Of course, then we see, Kenpachi holding his Shikai, it's a massive blade. Of course, Gremmy then creates numerous copies of himself that surround Kenpachi and attempt to trap him in a small vacuum pocket of space. And he's easily able to slash his way out of that pocket vacuum of space somehow. He cuts down a few of the Gremmy doubles. They explode. But Kenpachi is standing there unharmed. Of course, Gremmy states that he'll just become stronger than Kenpachi in order to beat him. And we see him lunge at him. His body starts to change. However, as he gets closer to Kenpachi, we see his body just start to fall apart. Kenpachi then states that, Gremmy turned him into a monster in his head. And it's that monster that killed him. Then, the ending theme plays, but it of course continues afterwards with another scene after the end credits, where we see Gremmy lying on the ground. Of course we see Kenpachi appear before him, and we see Gremmy's body just start to wither away, and we see this brain in a jar fall on the ground, which is of course because Gremmy's body is just another part of his imagination. He's actually just the brain in the jar. And we see him fully fade away. This episode did cut some things from the manga, which I'm going to briefly go over here. There are two big things I can immediately think of that were cut from the anime episode, which were all the other characters' reactions to the media. And we also had some of the scene with Askin talking cut out. Like, it was still in the anime to a certain extent, but it was fairly cut down compared to the manga version of it. And there were a few other minute things here and there, like a few lines here and there that were cut, but other than that, the rest of it was adapted properly. The ending poem was another new poem, this time from the perspective of Candace Catnip. In terms of my overall thoughts, I thought the episode was pretty good. I enjoyed it a lot, honestly. Well, I think this is where I'm going to end it. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful week. I will see you in the next video. Bye.